I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a regular guest, one of the guys I have on more than probably anybody else. He's a personal friend of mine, and I can always tell when I need to have him on when I start getting pinged that people say, hey, get on Gregory Mannarino or TradersChoice.net. And of course, that's who we got on. Greg squared today. Gregory Mannarino, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
It is great to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me back.
You sent me a chart. I want to get to that in a minute because I want to kind of build to what the chart means and what your analysis is of the chart. Because in the pre-interview, we talked about the first thing I want to talk about is gold. You are a big gold proponent, silver proponent as well too, but we don't talk much about it. And just recently got a big pop up here by almost $20 in a day. What's your read on gold being now approaching $1,300 an ounce?
Greg, we ain't seen nothing yet. That's what I have to say with regard to the price action of precious metals here. Look, I think the easiest way to put this into a context for people to understand is the global debt issue that you and I have spoken about, I don't even know how many times, is going to get not just worse, Greg, but monumentally worse, especially in light of the geopolitical landscape, in light of the fact that world central banks have no alternative, none, and I mean zero, other than to continue to inflate and inflate and inflate. It's just so easy to understand why you need to be in hard assets right now, in an alternative currency, because again, they have no alternative. So get on the opposite side of that trade, something I've been talking about forever. These assets have nowhere to go, but higher, and I mean higher, Greg.
Is this what the rush into gold is? Is that little people? Is that somebody going down to your local coin store and buying an ounce of gold? Give me a couple of silver eagles. Give me a half ounce of gold, or is this institutional players driving it up? $18-20 in a day.
Well, it's institutions. It's the richest people on earth. It's governments who are asking to repatriate their gold. This should all be a big tell for everyone to understand. Look, people have a choice here, and it should be pretty evident. You can sit there and you can choose, and everyone's a free agent to hold paper. You want to hold paper dollars or paper euros or paper anything, or you can choose an alternative store of wealth, something that is proven to be so for thousands of years. It's that simple, and there's a lot of people out there who would rather be holding paper. And I say, good, let them hold as much as they want. And if it makes them happy, I'm all for it. But for anybody who's got, well, let's put this into a real terms, who's got a brain that maybe works a little bit, it's easy to understand where you need to be, why you need to bet against this debt, why you need to become your own central bank in this environment. Look, it should be clear to people that we are now at a pivotal moment, and I want to expand on that just a little bit. Whenever we see, and I urge people to do a little research about this, whenever the economy here in the United States starts to get shaky, unfortunately, it seems that we escalate or enter into new wars. And I think, unfortunately, that's where we're going. And you and I have spoken on the phone, in private conversations, and even on your show here, how that is the grand goal. There's no doubt about it. War is the goal. War has always been the goal. We're already in it. I really believe that this war started a while ago, but now it's really started to come to the public light here. We're now into the propaganda war, something you and I spoke about earlier in the pre-interview, where we're going to start hearing all, this side saying this and another side saying that. This is very typical, very classic of what goes on at the beginning of every major engagement. And unfortunately, I feel like look, let me put another perspective on this for people that don't understand. Doesn't matter who's in the White House. Does not matter, period. The The enforcement arm of the Federal Reserve is the United States military, and I can prove that in a paragraph. If people do not understand how the petrodollar works, maybe you need to look into it. The petrodollar basically is a system which mandates the U.S. military to protect the oil of OPEC nations. And why would they do this? So there can be a continuous demand for dollars. They price their oil in U.S. dollars. It's very simple. So keep that in mind. Wars are engineered, and they will decide how much blood is going to be spilled to keep this twisted, frankly disgusting, debt-based economic model going. So that's where we are right now. And I see so much going on. If you want to show that chart that you have, we can even talk about that. Well, I think it's
Before I get to this chart, I want to just kind of. So this is what you're seeing with the whole Russian, Syria. Russia has said that hey, that was yes, Syria did drop bombs, but they hit an ISIS a chemical manufacturing facility, and that was a false flag. And now Putin is out saying there are more false flags. And Nikki Haley in the UN is saying, hey, listen, you're stupid, Russia. You said you were supposed to take away, these chemical weapons, and you didn't. She probably has a good point there as well. But ultimately, Putin is saying that this was a false flag event, and there are more coming. You said, and then and Russia is the one asking for an investigation. Why isn't the U.S. asking for an investigation about this, chemical attack, this gas attack? We should ask for it. I mean, I'm an American. I want to know who actually did it. I want the truth. I want the truth. I don't want the Republicans or the Democrats or the Russians or I just want the truth. I just want to know exactly what we're getting into. I mean, Russia is a nuclear-armed country, and this could escalate into a nuclear war. I can't imagine Russia wanting to leave Syria. Well, I can't imagine Russia giving up their naval base and their new Air Force base over there, relatively new. So you're saying, are we headed for war no matter what?
No matter what. We've basically been in a constant state of war for decades. It's almost since the inception of our country here. It just doesn't stop. The propagation of war and the escalation of wars is a major cash generating machine. Okay. And unfortunately, this is what they do. And these wars are financed by the central banks. Look, look, I am not sitting here being a conspiracy theorist. These are facts. And I urge people to look into this. And what you're talking about with regard to Russia right now is absolutely predictable. We're going to hear more of this. There's going to be more propaganda. There's going to be more lies being force-fed to the masses. And I urge everyone to right now be very diligent as to what you're hearing. Don't believe anything. Don't even believe me while I'm sitting here. Do research. Research every single thing that you're hearing before you conclude what's really going on here. But look, it all boils down to a very simple thing. It all boils down to those that are pulling the strings. Who's pulling the strings? The strings are being pulled by those that run the system, those that are holding the cash box. I know you're well aware of this, Greg, probably more than anybody else. What they do is they project onto people a scenario that they believe is reality. Okay, and this is what they've been getting away with. This is how they can do the things that they do. But again, this does not matter. It doesn't matter who ordered what or what's going on. If they want, meaning the central banks, and this is the Federal Reserve here. Look, they sit there and they rule by secrecy. They sit there and they lurk in the shadows and they leave other people out there to take the blame. This is the Federal Reserve. This is the world central banks now who have banded together here and realize, again, this is a wealth transfer. This is all this is. This is all it always has been. This is what world central banks do, none more so than the Federal Reserve. They blow bubbles and they burst bubbles. Greg, let's talk about.
Wait. Stop. I want you to come back to this. So they banded together, the central banks, and they run out of ways to prop the economy up. Is this the ultimate bubble? Is war the ultimate bubble?
Greg, the ultimate bubble right now is the global debt bubble. They know this debt can never be paid back. It can never be paid back. This is common knowledge. But yet people are still, and this goes back to the chart, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, people still want to hold on to because they feel like holding debt, holding a unit of debt.
Bonds, sovereign bonds. Yeah.
Yeah, they think that this is a safety play.
Well, let's go. Let's bring your chart up right now. I'm gonna bring the chart up. This is something that you sent me, and two of the things you pointed out in the pre-interview, I marked the chart up, was this W. So here we have boom, and this is the sign where, just before the election, where the bond market goes up, and here we goes, it drops off again, and then we have the same pattern here, and you're saying that the pattern is going to turn into this. In other words, people are going to run into bonds. Is that right? Explain this chart.
What I'm saying is, if you're looking at that chart there, that there is the possibility, nothing is written in stone here, but if you do look at that double bottom pattern, it is suggesting completely the opposite of what we are all being force-fed from the mainstream media right now, Greg. Let me put a perspective on that just real quick. We have all been told that the Federal Reserve is going to now start unloading their balance sheet. They're going to start dumping their balance sheet. And we've all been told that we're going to start to see interest rates rise because of what the Federal Reserve is doing. They're no longer going to be reinvesting their maturing Treasury securities into more debt. So the logical thing for people to assume, and this is being, again, the narrative that's being pushed on everyone from the mainstream, is that we are going to see rates rise. In a normal environment, this would happen. But we have to entertain the possibility, looking at the chart that you just showed, we have to entertain the possibility that we could see the absolute polar opposite of that. We could see, again, I'm not saying this is written in stone, but we need to entertain the possibility that we could see a mass inflow into debt here. And I'm talking about a mass inflow into debt here, which would drive interest rates down hard. Now,
let me intercede here. One way you were going to say, one way. And so you're saying that this could be a giant scam on the market that, how do we keep rates from going up, and how do we force people into the bond market? I know, start a war that could turn nuclear. Is that what you're telling me, that they would actually start a war to drive people into the bond market and lower rates, which they can't do unless they have some external force? Kid me.
Well, this is that is a logical way of looking at it here, but I think the market is smelling something. The bond market lately, and I talk about this all the time, in fact, probably too much. The bond market is trying to warn us of something, and we need to listen. We need to listen. We can't sit here and let the mainstream financial channels, the mainstream media dictate how we think. We need to look at what they're saying and kind of say, okay, what's likely the opposite of what they're saying? And more than likely, that is what's going to happen here. So
wait. So rates would actually, on the 10-year Treasury, they're 333 and 334, something like that. They would actually go down. People would be afraid they'd go into the market. And then here's a headline that I saw on Zero Hedge, and it says, "Are corporate pensions about to start dumping their $1 trillion in equity holdings?" And you're saying that we could not get a bond crash, we could get a stock market crash first.
Well, Greg, this is how it's going to play out here. You always got to look at the bond market first. The bond market is going to give us a signal. More specifically, looking at the 10-year yield as a trader, this is what I look at all the time here. But we're still having the issue of the flattening yield curve. This is kind of complicated. It's kind of convoluted. But what I see here, just to kind of lay it out, is the possibility. In fact, I think it's a very strong possibility that we are going to see a mass rush into perceived safety, the perceived safety of bonds. Now, why? let's look at what's going on geopolitically. There are pawns being set up all over the place, Greg. The drums of war already are very loud. They're getting louder. Now, the market doesn't know what it really wants to do at this point. We're waiting for earnings. Earnings are going to be coming in a couple of days here. There's a lot of speculation as to what we're going to see. A lot of people are saying, hey, earnings are going to be pretty good, but I don't think that's what we need to be looking at right now. We need to be looking at geopolitical events more than what these earnings are, because I tell you something, I think forward guidance, which is more important than what the actual earnings are, has the potential to come in negatively. So it's not so much what companies' earnings are. It's so much what they're saying is going to happen. We got it? Now, the bond market there, again, going back to that chart, is kind of giving us a warning that maybe something is about to happen completely the opposite of what people are expecting. And I think that's very interesting. I would have to say that nobody else is talking about this. Again, you get that big W, that double bottom pattern. We had that one. You saw how the market reacted. Now, look, nothing is written in stone, but I think we need to listen, especially in light of the war drums that are being pounded all over the place. So if this happens, if we start to see a flood of cash moving, and you see, I'm not talking about a small move here in the bond market. I'm talking about a big move lower with regard to rates. What will this do? Where's that cash going to come from, Greg? Well, it's the safety move. So cash is going to move rapidly out of the stock market. Let me rephrase that. Has the potential to move rapidly out of the stock market into perceived safety, which would be the bond market, okay? Bond yields will drop because of all the fear. You will also see gold and silver move dramatically higher in this kind of a scenario. So we need to look. If we do not, as either investors, traders, or just human beings that have a functioning brain, if we don't consider all of these factors, then we're missing the big picture. There's going to be many people who are probably going to respond to this video and say, oh, Greg is crazy, it's not going to happen. Maybe Greg is crazy, but I'm just saying we need to consider that this is a scenario which may unfold, and it could have very dramatic consequences for the stock market negatively, and be very, very bullish here for bonds, obviously, and for precious metals.
Oh, and what about, it doesn't have to be the United States, and Russia may not be at the center of this. I mean, now you have China moving 150,000 troops on the North Korean border, and now they've threatened that we'll take out your nuclear facilities if you cross the line. What does that mean? I mean, you could have a major blowout between China and North Korea. I mean, North Korea is probably not really much of a match for China, but they do have a 1 million or 2 million man army, and they do have nuclear weapons that their Kim Jong-un is probably just crazy enough to, turn them on China. I don't know. I mean, what happens if that works out? What happens if China does take some preemptive action against North Korea?
All I can say is this. I believe the market is smelling something. The bond market, more specifically, is smelling something. And we need to listen. We can't just sit back and say everything is okay and everything is going to be fine here, because we understand what is going on here. Let me just bring this up too, for those people that are not aware of what's going on here. So we understand the Fed is going to start unloading the balance sheet, mortgage-backed securities, which is it's a whole story in itself, and the Treasury market here now.
And wait! I talked to. Hold that thought. The issue. But you had called me up and said, "Hey, man, this is a big deal. They're going to dump their bond market. You want to know what I think?" I said, "Yeah, hit me." And you were like, "Well, we're going to have the top is in real estate. We're going to ultimately have higher interest rates, and real estate markets are going to housing prices. Real estate markets going to plunge." Is that the issue you're about ready to bring up? Is that what you're still forecasting?
Well, that's part of it. But again, if things progress in a normal fashion, if in other words, if geopolitical events don't start to put a lot of weight against the stock market and into the bond market, that's what would happen here. We would see interest rates rise, which would cap the price here on housing. And that would open up a whole new bag of worms as well. Because again, the reason why people are feeling rich today even if they're not, it's because their houses have gone up in value. They're more apt to spend. They're more apt to spend. But if the Federal Reserve's initial plan were to work out the way they wanted to, in other words, we have a normal rising interest rate. We see the curve starting to get some slope to it and not be so flat, the yield curve. That scenario would unfold. We would get pressure on housing, no doubt about it. And this would have a lot of effects, a lot of fallout from it. But in the opposite scenario, we would still see, again, this major safety play. And we need to just consider that. But you know what really
I'm going to back up. I'm going to interrupt you here. So, do you think that this war is being manufactured to help the Federal Reserve exit their bond portfolio? Their, to basically to reduce their balance sheet, to sell these mortgage-backed securities. You said they pumped it. Now they're going to dump it. They reinflated the housing market. Do you think they could be that damn evil is to actually get the United States and other countries into a giant war so people will rush into bonds and give them cover to sell their crap?
Greg, it's much worse than that. It's so much worse than that. We are existing in an alternative universe. And I mean that in the literal sense. The world central banks, the Federal Reserve, introduced this fiat monetary system. This has allowed them to steal from future generations into infinity to sustain the now. In other words, just to maintain our current lifestyle, okay, here in the United States, we would need to double the debt again in the next 10 years. Double the debt again in the next 10 years. This cannot happen. Again, this mechanism of borrowing cash from the future to sustain the now, really, look, no one could put a top on this because these world central banks have done things that I think are completely outrageous up until now here. They managed to keep the bubble suspended, but the debt isn't the biggest bubble the world has ever seen. This bubble is going to pop. When the debt bubble pops, we're going to get a resource problem, a resource issue. We will not be able to borrow these funds from the future anymore. We are going to get a near, this is going to sound crazy, and I've said this before, we could experience a near extinction level event on Earth with regard to human life. I mean, resources will become scarce. And the way they are living will be completely turned upside down. Again, it's a debt-based economic model that demands that cash be borrowed into existence in greater and greater amounts to sustain where we are. If we can no longer do that, if we max out our credit card, we already have, 20+ trillion in debt here. If we get into more skirmishes, more wars, we have to double it even faster than before. Can't happen. It cannot happen.
Wait. And you're saying that war is, could be an extinction level event when you talk about nuclear weapons. You're saying that war is a better alternative to letting interest rates spike and the whole thing, totally collapse. And that's
I think it's all tied together.
So you do think it's tied together? You think the Fed knows that the rates are going to rise, it's going to be catastrophic to the bond market, and they need to force everybody into the burning building?
Greg, does anybody here listening, and I would love to hear comments about this, does anybody here find it suspicious that the Federal Reserve is talking about dumping their mortgage-backed securities right now and dumping Treasury securities right now? Does anybody find that to be somewhat suspicious right now where geopolitical events appear to be going? If you don't find that to be somewhat troubling, then